All right, so I think everyone's in. They'll all be muted by default. So please, guys, when we have time for the question and answers, raise your hand or whatever. We'll see what we can do in terms of getting you guys some questions and answers with my good friend here, Emile. So look, it's tough to sort of introduce Emile Bouret. You're a jack of all trades, a car fiend, aircraft fiend. I was like, what would be your 30-second elevator pitch? Explain.
I don't need 30 seconds. I would say car super geek, and that I think pretty much covers it.
That's awesome. So Emile, as you may not know, he's a BMW performance driving instructor, among many other things. So we'll go, oh, look, if you've seen Emile before on VinWki, I'm gonna try and avoid all those VinWki stories, which are just simply freaking amazing. Especially the one with the car hitting the, or excuse me, the plane hitting the car. The other way around.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah, so where did your sort of love for cars come from? What was the genesis?
First, let me back up a second. I don't. You guys have probably seen Travis Pastrana's Gymkhana video that aired yesterday. Have you seen it?
I've had the chance to watch it yet.
Oh, dude, you got to watch it. Anyway, I had flashbacks. There was a scene where a Red Bull racing airplane is doing a very close flyby with him, and I had a little bout of PTSD remembering my episode with the airplane. But it all started for me as a kid. Really, my earliest childhood memory, and I've said this before, I think on one of the VinWki stories, my earliest memory is being a toddler standing on the seat of my dad's Toyota 2000 GT, the only one on the island of Puerto Rico, one of 351 super rare cars, most of you guys know, racing around the island. And I think that did it for me. My dad was a car geek. I was exposed to this amazing car as a toddler and as a young child, and that planted the seed. I got the gifts that I got were always little matchboxes or cars. I got a book as a kid of Formula One racing cars, and I was just mesmerized by cars from day one, really. So it started really early for me.
That's pretty awesome. So now you got the car bug in you. What was the first car that you got? Were you still in Puerto Rico at the time?
No. So now my family was in Florida. My mother had remarried, and my very first car was a 1986 Ford Mustang GT, 5-liter. And I bought it from a good friend of mine who was a hardcore GM guy. And his best friend had convinced him into finally buying a Ford Mustang. He bought this Mustang. And then sadly, about a year later, the other friend in buying the Mustang was involved in a fatality in a car accident where he passed away. And so my friend Bill wanted nothing to do with this Mustang anymore. And that was how I came to have my first car, 5-liter Mustang, T-top, charcoal gray. I loved that car. And that car taught me not everything I know, because I was racing 3-wheelers from an early age, but it taught me a lot about vehicle dynamics, and it was my baby forever. In fact, I kept it for a long time, Mike. I sold it about 16 or 17 years ago to a guy in Arizona, and I've been trying to track the car down now. I just found the VIN the other day, and I've been trying to track the car down with the help of the intrawebs, so I can buy it back if the guy will sell it back to me.
That's awesome. Now, you mentioned racing, so where did you start that, and how did you progress in racing?
So,
the same as going to design school.
I had a family friend who was into 3-wheelers, ATCs, if you remember what those things are. Some of you guys are probably too young to remember those. And he's the one that really pushed me to start racing them. It's funny. So this is a guy that lived in our neighborhood. His name's Rocky. And he was like a father figure to a bunch of guys and girls and kids in the neighborhood, because he was just a little kid at heart. And I remember he would see me. He taught karate to a lot of the kids in the neighborhood, and I'd be there for my karate lesson. But I remember seeing his 3-wheelers in the garage, and he always caught me looking at them. And he offered a couple times, hey, throw a leg over that thing, go for a ride. And I was so scared that I didn't know how to ride it that I was just like, no. And one day he didn't give me the choice. He just walked over, he started, and goes, go ride that thing. And I started riding it. And long story less long, I really got into it. And I was at his house almost every afternoon trying to ride the 3-wheeler. Eventually got my own. And then when I showed a little bit of promise, I decided to try to buy a racing one. And so I worked a couple of jobs, seasonal employment at SeaWorld in Central Florida. I waxed the guy's boat. One of our neighbor's friends had a catamaran with 2 massive freaking big blocks on it. It's called Too Fat to Fly. And I waxed that boat. I washed all his cars. Any odd job I could do to earn some money. And I finally saved enough money to buy my first racing three-wheeler, a Honda 250R. This is 1985 now, so I'm dating my ass big time. And that's where I started on that bike.
And now you went to design school. So how did you go from being like a car nut into I want to design
it's
cars,
a good question.
Essentially?
So from those early memories as a kid being in love with cars, how I sort of got the bug out, how I expressed myself, I would draw cars, and all I ever wanted to do was race cars. So as I was drawing cars in my head, I was winning Grand Prix all over the world, right? A kid's imagination and all that. So I would draw cars all day, every day. And you do that for 15, 16 years, you get pretty good at drawing cars. And so when it came time to go to school somewhere, I thought engineering was what I should do because I wanted to be a racing driver. And I thought engineering can only help with that. And then I found out about Art Center, College of Design, and that car design was actually a thing, which, I mean, I don't want to blame my high school counselors for not pointing me in that way. I mean, I'd get in trouble in class for drawing cars all the time. You'd think somebody would say, hey, by the way, you can do this as a career. In fact, I went to a counselor at the University of Florida and talked to this guy about, I want to be a car designer. And he's like, oh, that's a dying profession. Cars are going to be designed by computers. You should do something else. And I was just distraught at like, man, that's all I wanted to do. And then I found an article on the 100th anniversary of the automobile in U.S. News and World Report magazine. And there was a sidebar to this article on Jack Telnack, the then VP of design for Ford, the highest position in design for Ford. And he was standing there, you know, looking all awesome in his Hugo Boss suit or whatever suit it was, with these concept cars behind him and renderings of the concept cars on the wall. And I was like,
nice.
That's what I want to do. And that's how I found out about car design. I put a sort of haphazard portfolio together with the help of a gentleman who ran the art department of a community college in Florida, of all things, Dennis Jenkins. I'll never forget him because he was instrumental in teaching me in my early days about design and helping me put that portfolio together, which looking back, and I still have the portfolio in my garage, looking back at it now, it was pretty terrible, but it was enough to get me into Art Center. And it's a very competitive school to get into. And so I remember I became class president, and one of the meetings I had with our then chairman of the Department of Transportation Design, a guy named, it's Jason Hill's dad. I can't remember his first name right now, but Hill, former designer at GM. I remember asking Ron Hill, him, Ron, how did I get in? My portfolio sucked. And he said to me, he goes, we saw in your portfolio what they call the spook, which is they saw the promise. They saw the passion for the car. They saw the thinking behind the stuff I was doing. He goes, yeah, your drawings weren't great compared to some of the other stuff we see. They weren't that polished, but we could see you thinking. We could see your love for cars in it. So really cool that even though I didn't have a big art background, because I didn't care about art or design really, I just loved cars. Right. They still saw something in my portfolio that got me into the school. So I didn't find out until after I was in at Art Center how difficult it was to get in. And I just feel like I got super lucky, right time, right place. And the spook was in my portfolio currently.
This week, I think, if I recall correctly, one of your classmates was essentially is the Tesla designer now, right?
Yeah, so chief designer at Tesla, Franz von Holzhausen. He's more than, he oversees all of design at Tesla, but he's Elon Musk's right-hand guy. I mean, he's, I don't know this for sure, but I think he's probably the longest lasting employee at Tesla. He's been there 12 or 13 years now, and which is saying something because not everybody can survive or last through Elon. But yeah, he's super talented guy, probably the most talented guy ever to graduate from that school. And we were competitive in school. He was my roommate as well. So he pushed me for sure. I like to think that I pushed him a little bit as well. But yeah, he was super talented. The thing about Franz, he could not only download whatever he had in his head via his arm, his pencil or pen. So drawing was not a barrier for him. He could draw anything. He could also do it super quickly. So he could download 3 or 4 ideas to each other student's one, and beautifully communicated, visually in 2 dimensions. So he was a talent from the word go. There's no surprise he ended up where he has ended up.
All right. So you're done with school. What's next for Emile? Where do you go from finishing design school?
Another good question that I don't think anybody's ever asked me that. So about 3/4 of the way through Art Center, I did an internship at Chrysler, paid internship, $400 a week, which I thought I was a rich guy.
Big bucks, man.
Oh yeah, listen, that was the first time I had a paycheck that big, and for drawing cars, it was insane. So I saved my money to go to the Jim Russell Racing School because I'd been racing 3-wheelers. I turned pro when I was 13. I had some success there, And where I lived in Florida, I was the man in the car. But in this neighborhood in Florida, we had like 3 curvy roads, right? So I didn't know where I would stack up among other real drivers, people that really knew how to race. And so I wanted to go to racing school to find out if I did have a talent for it. And so I saved my money for my internship. I went to the Jim Russell Racing Driver School at the end of my internship. And all the instructors, I set a lap record for students in the Formula 4s at Laguna Seca. And all the instructors were like, you have to come back to the year-end runoff we do, where we invite the top students from the schools. And it's a 1-week competition. The winner wins a scholarship and a whole season of racing the Russell Formula Mazda cars. So long story left long, I went back in December. I used some student loan money to pay for it. I was pretty broke.
That's what you do.
Yeah, that's what you do. I didn't know it was illegal at the time. That's my defense. But long story left long, I won the runoff. So I kept advancing throughout the week. I beat 321 other guys. There's 322 of us. And I got a year free of racing in the Russell series, which probably cost about 125, 150 grand at the time. It was amazing.
That's huge bucks.
It was huge. No, it was huge. And it really started my driving career. Without that, I wouldn't have been able to drive. And so, but the challenge for me was that I was still at school at Art Center. It's a very demanding school. I was class president. I had 2 scholarships that paid all my tuition, one from General Motors with no commitment to them once I graduated. And the other half of my tuition was paid by the school, by Art Center, a scholarship that I competed against other guys with and got. And the school was not too keen on me taking off to go racing, because school at Art Center is from Monday through Saturday. And some of the classes, the class schedule was 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., and 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Now, you didn't have that long of a day every day, but you had that long of a day 3 times a week at least. And the other days it was 9 to 7 or 9 to 4. And the workload was massive. So the school overloads the students so that you have to figure out how to handle it. And they're trying to set you up for the industry, which is a high pressure industry. And when you get out of school and you go to work, as I did in the car design business, yes, it's demanding in the grand scheme of things, but compared to what you were used to at school, it's nothing. So the school does a good job of preparing you. But I was skipping my Friday class to drive up to Monterey, and I was skipping Saturday class, obviously, because I was race weekend, and Sunday, and I'd come back either Sunday night or early Monday morning. It just wasn't a good look. So they asked me to resign as class president, which I did. And then one teacher, who will remain nameless, because I do know his name, campaigned for me to lose my scholarship as well, because I wasn't presenting myself as a good example. And his goal was, he was trying to convey to me, you need to focus on one thing. If you do 2 things, you will do 2 things to the detriment of each thing. And it turns out he was right. At the time, I wanted to kill the guy because it cost me, like my last year of school, I had to borrow money to live. I had to borrow money for tuition. So that sucked, but I don't have that many hard feelings. Hey, look at that. I see you. I don't have really bad feelings for the guy, because I know what he was trying to say to me, and it would have been a good thing to listen to. Sadly, ironically for him, it would have probably meant that I would have quit school and gone racing. But I continued to try to do both things. And so anyway, that's how I got started, through the Jim Russell Racing School, from money I made on my internship. Yeah.
So if I recall from Mullins, I think that's where you met Matt.
That is where I met Matt Mullins as well. Yeah. So the year that I ran the Russell series, Matt was in the series as well.
We should pause there and explain who Matt Mullins is. Matt Mullins is now the chief driving instructor for the BMW Performance Driving School. So you guys have a history. I guess that sort of ties in sometime later in your career to get you into BMW.
So it's funny. I ran into Matt again at Daytona in maybe 2010 or 2011. I was there with Audi giving hot laps in the Audi R8, and he was there with BMW in the M5s. And I remember looking at him going, I know you from someplace. I had already done some BMW work. And he came up, we started talking, and it just like, I had this feeling that I knew him. And then all of a sudden we realized, oh shit, we ran the Russell series together. And I don't really—
You're the guy that beat me.
Yeah, no. I definitely did. He wasn't the guy that beat me. I know.
Matt saying to you, you're the guy who beat me. I remember you.
I remind him from time to time. I was running the front. Anyhow, yeah. So we knew each other from the Russell series way back in the day, and we just gone different ways. He went to the East Coast. He ran some NASCAR stuff. Got actually really far in his career and did really well. But yeah, we just lost track of each other and then reconnected through BMW. And after I knew that, I started working a lot more for them, since I had, a buddy on the inside, you could say.
Right. So you finished doing the Russell Racing School and I guess one season of the Mazda Formula. what happens after that? What's next in Emile's career?
So the really tough thing about that year is that I had the whole season for free, but because of my school commitments and me trying to juggle both things, like my teacher was trying to suggest, both things suffered, right? So I ended up skipping 3 of the race weekends that were free freaking race weekends because of school commitments, because I was still trying to do well in school, obviously.
Right.
And it pretty much cost me the championship. The other thing was that I drive up on Friday, so I'd skip all of practicing Friday. I would jump into the car Saturday Saturday morning once I was there, having slept in my car at the track because I couldn't afford a hotel. And the guys already had practice. So it was I started really well in my season. I won the first 3 or 4 races I was in, and then my results started dipping a little bit. I was still running top 3, top 4, still winning some races, but I was behind the 8 ball from the word go, because the first time I jumped in the car was qualifying and everybody else was already up to speed. And I was just trying. Sometimes we say in the racing schools and in the BMW schools we teach, if you try too hard, you can overdrive the car. And I was overdriving. I was trying way too hard because I was behind the 8 ball from the get go. So I finished, I think, 4th or 5th in that championship, missing a few weekends. But I had just, at the end of that year, I was right when I graduated Art Center, and I put together sort of a traveling portfolio once I'd interviewed with car companies and had some job offers. Before I accepted any job offers, I went back to Florida to see a friend's boss. So a girl that I dated in Florida, her dad was the president of Gooding Supermarket. And I found out that John Gooding, the CEO of the supermarket chain, was racing cars. And so I said, well, I need to meet John. Long story, slightly less long. I met with John. I showed him my portfolio. I showed him the paintings that I'd done of racing cars. I showed him a model, a quarter scale model, which is a big model that I'd done in school, of a futuristic Formula One car. And I said, look, I don't know what I can do for you, but I need to be in a race car. I know you're racing. Help me. And I sort of told him what I'd done with the Russell School and that kind of thing. And so he decided to help me. And he became my first racing sponsor, essentially. He put me in we shared a car in an IMSA Firestone. Sorry, we were supposed to share a car in an IMSA Firestone Firehawk race, an RX-7 Turbo in the sport class. So at the time, that's like what Michelin Pilot Sport.
The challenge one. Now. Yeah, the GS, basically a GS class.
GS class is the top class. It was in my day too. Back in the day, it was called Firestone Firehawk, but same series, same types of cars.
Okay.
Way more stock then than they are now. Now they're full on race
cars. Yeah.
But we had GS like they do now. We had Sport like they do now, and then we had Touring, which I think they now call TC. But anyhow, we were in the middle class, in the sport class, an RX-7 Turbo that wasn't competitive all year. I put the car on pole for its class. I was running 3rd overall. I had 2 Porsches ahead of me, 2 GS Porsches ahead of me. Every other GS car was behind me when I handed off to my teammate. And John Gooding ended up not winning the race. And he put me as a teammate. I had a guy named Northam, who owns a small pre-owned car dealership in Florida, Porsches, Ferraris, that kind of thing. Super nice guy, but old gentleman driver that was off the pace. He was 8 seconds a lap faster. And so I watched my first pro win disappear right in front of me, because we went from 1st in class by a lap and a half, by the way, all the way back to 4th. So we didn't even make the podium. And it's funny, my future teammate and good friend of mine, Boris, said was in that race in the same class. I think he ended up winning the championship that year, and he was in 2nd place, a lap and a half behind us when I pitted and gave the car to my teammate. So that was a bummer. And in fact, John Gooding, my sponsor, was begging Northam to let him get back in because Gooding gave him his seat, sold it to Nort, whatever. I guess he didn't have high expectations. When he saw that we had a chance to win, he begged him to let him take over, because he would have been significantly faster than Nort. We probably still would have won the race. And Nort didn't let him. And he got in the car, went 8 seconds a lap slower, and that was it. So, but the good news in that race is that then Gooding said, okay, I'm going to give this kid money because he's got talent. He can probably go places. And so he was my first sponsor, and we went Firestone Firehawk racing together.
Very sweet. So sometime in the future, you get over, and I think you were basically the head instructor for Audi's driving program.
Yeah, first chief instructor for the Audi sports car experience in 2007.
Very sweet. So what was it any different than what you do at BMW now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was different. The cars were different, right? So the big thing with Audi is Quattro, right? And so you, and I work, this, I know I still work for a bunch of different car manufacturers, including Audi and BMW. And I'm lucky in that the companies I work for are companies I truly believe in. So when I'm sort of pimping their product, it's not a hard sell. I mean, yes, I change hats and change sort of what I'm thinking when I'm talking about quattro versus rear wheel drive, but you know, the advantages are real. It's not something that's made up. It's not some kind of snake oil they're trying to sell people. And so the messages were slightly different. You know, we when it rained in Sonoma, which was rare, but when it rained, we continued to run Audi sports car experience because we have quattro.
Do it, yeah.
When you work for other manufacturers before all-wheel drive was so prevalent and you saw the weather coming in, you're wondering if you're going to cancel the day, or you're praying for lightning so you don't have to go out there and run sometimes, right? So it was great, but vehicle dynamics are vehicle dynamics, so that stuff didn't change. There are a lot more similarities between that program and say M-Track days that we run now than there are, you know, differences.
And so going back to getting involved with Audi, how does one get noticed by the guys at Audi and say, this guy's got the stuff to be our chief instructor? How does that happen?
That's a great question as well. In general, not specifically with Audi, but in general, most of the guys that end up as driving instructors for manufacturers are either failed racing drivers. You've had a racing career of some sort and it ended before you wanted it to. I mean, it's a bit of a cynical way of saying, you know, you're done racing, but realistically, all of us would be IndyCar stars or Formula One stars if we had our way, right? So at some point your career ended. And just like a tennis pro or a golf pro that was maybe on the tour or on the circuit at one point and no longer is, either be it talent or what have you, injury, they go to a club and become the club pro. That's kind of what driving instructor or racing drivers do. You go to racing schools and you're the pro, right? And you become an instructor. The next thing, how you get found to become a lead instructor, if you have the gift of gab, which you know that I do.
Yes, you do.
Speak somewhat coherently, not to say eloquently, but if you can convey a message and convey technical terms in layman terms to people, people will notice that, hey, this guy has, not only is he passionate, not only is he a decent driver, but he can communicate these ideas, and it's not so difficult to listen to him, right? And so then you get opportunities to speak. And then if you do well there, they just continue to sort of grow. And so the harder you work, the better you end up doing if you have those abilities in you, or if you push yourself to find that within you.
Nice. I think you're also involved with the red cars, as you call them.
Yep.
How do you get involved with Ferrari?
It's funny. I always say the red cars, and not to keep mentioning VinWki stories, but I'll hear the comments like, we know it's Ferrari. Why doesn't he just say Ferrari? Well, I don't say Ferrari because they, like a bunch of other companies, have a team of people scouring the internets for mention of the company. And believe it or not, they review or look at all these mentions. And as somebody that works for them, there are certain things I can and can't say, right? And I've threaded that line sort of carefully sometimes, I thought. But they've told me several times that I have 3 strikes. I don't think they understand how baseball works, which is fine by me. They're like, you're on 3 strikes. You better be careful. And I think that it was through Audi. So somebody had come through and seen me present at Audi or lead the class at Audi, and seen how I was passionate. And I did a Ferrari program then in Miami, not as the lead instructor, just as one of the instructors at Homestead. And I think somebody just saw a conversation I was having with some of the participants and realized, hey, not only can this guy speak relatively well, but he's got passion that just exudes from him. You can tell that I was passionate for the brand. And the first time I had an opportunity to present for the brand, they saw that not only was I passionate, not only could I speak about the brand, but I knew my shit. I mean, my blood's Ferrari red, as I will tell anybody. And it's so funny. They've told me when I've had some of my strikes, my various 3 strikes, that, you know, we continue to use you and we do love you because you know more about this brand than pretty much anybody here. It's just, you know how it is when it's something you love, you can't help but share that excitement and that passion with people. And I think that's something that manufacturers want to see. I mean, that's, all cars are pretty great. You'd be hard pressed to go out and find a crappy car today, right? Especially when you're talking about cars at this level, the supercars or even BMW M cars. And so what differentiates them? I mean, it's designed to a certain extent, right?
Okay, we're going to get into that too.
Okay. But anyway, my point is that
new cars,
if the company can have somebody who can share that passion and communicate that passion and get others infected by that passion, probably a bad word nowadays in 2020 to say, they want that. And so that makes me attractive to them, thankfully.
I think one thing before we go into the design of certain new cars that are coming out from BMW, let's talk about the Nurburgring.
Oh,
And you raced there, it seems like years ago, but probably what, a year and a half ago?
last year. Yeah, my happy place. In fact,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, you got to show off your trophy if you got it.
I do.
Oh, you got
I do. My favorite one ever. First place gentleman. So we podiumed at the Nurburgring on our last race there. And the reason I'm so proud of that trophy, so to make the podium in that particular class, we were running the M240 Cup class, M240i Racing officially, but they just call it the BMW Cup car there. And it's the most populated class in that series. We had 68 cars in our class in that particular race, or 197 cars total in the race. And we're sort of mid-pack. So you have the GT3 cars, which are the fastest cars there. The Cup 7 cars, which are Porsche GT3 Cup cars, basically, which are faster than the GT3 cars, by the way, in a straight line. They just don't corner and stop as well. They don't have the downforce. Yeah. Then you have, I forget the name of the class, but like Cayman GT4 car, like GT4 class, actually. They don't call it GT4, they call it something else, Cup something. But there's
they have a bunch of different things.
Yeah,
it's a crazy amount.
And then a bunch of classes slower than us. So we're kind of like in the middle. But the most cars, and it's a spec class, right? You can't touch the cars. In fact, to show you how serious they are about it being a spec series, my big Puerto Rican frame, my hips didn't fit in the stock OMP seat, and the team had a Recaro seat that was slightly bigger. My hips fit in it, and so we tested that seat, and I fit in that seat. Come race weekend, we had to get all the other teams to sign to an agreement that we could switch from an OMP seat to a Recaro seat to fit my big butt. If they hadn't signed, I'd been driving like this at an angle,
squeezed into it somehow.
Yeah, in the OMP seat. So that's how closely what's the word I'm looking for? Equal those cars are there. That's how equal they are. Anyhow, we put in that class, and I'm proud of that trophy because I made the pass after a 6-hour race, 2 corners from the end for the final podium position. And that particular trophy, which is first place, is for the highest finishing gentleman 40 years or over. And I was 50 at the time. So I'm sitting on the podium, and one of the young BMW juniors, who I think finished second or first or something, looks over at me. He goes, "You are 40 years old?" And I, excuse my language, because I was very excited on the day. I go, "Bitch, I'm 50. And I don't know if it was lost in translation. He just kind of like looked at me like I called him a bad name and just got back in line. Yeah, it was really funny. So yeah, that was an amazing weekend. My birthday weekend last year. So great birthday. Podiumed on my favorite track on the planet, the only track I ever care to race on anymore. It was fantastic. The Nurburgring is, as you know, an extremely special place. Anybody listening that has any inclination of going, man, do whatever you have to do, because I'll tell you, being there, and not only the first time I was there, every time I'm there, I still can't believe that place exists in the world that we live in today, with lawsuits and everybody trying to save, all of the governments trying to save us from ourselves. It's amazing it exists, because it is every bit of dangerous that you heard. It is. It's just so gnarly, so insane, that place. Whew, Nurburgring.
So getting to the ring, do you have to have a special license? So how do you get that license to race on the ring?
You do, and it's quite the process. So you have to get certified. For guys like me that had a racing career in the U.S., it's a little bit easier, because you have to get the FIA to basically send a letter to the DSMB, the sanctioning body for the Nurburgring, saying that, yes, this guy did actually race, and he can take the certification course. If you were an amateur driver, I don't know how you get to that first step, because you can't just sign up for the certification course. So I went through IMSA. I raced through IMSA and SCCA and USAC. IMSA the most, and the most recent, even though it was 100 years ago. And I got IMSA to get me a letter showing kind of some of the stuff I've done. I sent that to the FIA, and I got my FIA letter that I then went and submitted to go into the certification course. Certification course is about a 3 to 4 hour online course that you do at home. I did it stateside. And it's like a DMV thing, where you watch some videos explaining things, and then you take a test. And that's part 1. And part 2, and you go through the various parts. The difference is that it's pass, fail, and you have 3 tries. If you don't fail after 3 tries, I think you either can't get your certificate, or you have to wait a year to take it again, or something crazy like that. And it's translated from German to English, and so some of the language and some of the questions is a little tricky, where a couple of the answers seem like they could be right. So it's a little tricky in that regard. But once you pass that, then you get into the course. And the course is essentially a track day where you have a certified instructor at the ring, and you can rent anything. You can rent a Suzuki Swift, or you can rent the 240 Cup car, which is what we did. So we wanted extra seat time in the car. Obviously, that was more expensive. And then you do lead follow behind this guy. Then you have to run 8 laps on your own without incident after you've done the 8 laps lead follow. And 8, like, keep in mind, a lap there is
a long time.
11-minute lap. At the pace we were driving during the track day is about an 11-minute lap. And that's the Grand Prix course and the Nordschleife combined.
Wow.
So you have to do that, and they look at your mileage to make sure that you ran the right amount of laps and all that stuff, and then you're in. And then you're on a provisional license. You have to complete a race then and finish in the top 75%, I want to say, of the field without incident or penalty. And then I think you do 2 races like that, and your license becomes official. And I think it's a permit C. And then you have to do X amount of races or races without incident, finishing in the top, I think now 50% of the field. It might still be 75% of the field to get your next permit up. And so because we podiumed on our second race there, that gave us our B permit. So now we can run. I mean, if I had the money, I could run a GT3 car at the Nurburgring now, which normally would have taken me about another year to get to.
Sweet. All right. So we're running low on time already. So let's go into the M4. So let me pull up a couple of things here.
Sorry, I'm long-winded with my answers. You know that going in.
I know. Right. So let's talk about 4 Series and basically the M4 as well.
All right.
And the M3. Oops. Brett, what was that? Oops.
Which one do you want me to comment on first? M4 or 440?
Well, let's pull up the M3, which is there. So if memory serves me correctly, you were one of the first people to drive the car, albeit extremely slowly in Florida.
Correct.
What were your impressions? Was the car camoed at that point?
It was not. So it was in January, we did a thing called the BMW Brand Summit for all the dealership owners around the world. And it was a big event. And we were part of the choreography team, I guess the driving team that drove the cars onto the stage. We had to turn in our phones at dark in the morning when we showed up, dressed in all, stunt driver black, so nobody could see us. And we were there all like a 16, 17, 18-hour day, a long, long day, doing nothing but waiting for our call to drive the car on stage at 5 miles an hour. So I have no driving impressions per se, but I got to see the car for the first time.
And what were your first impressions?
Not good at all. In fact, I was kind of disgusted with it when I first saw it. Having said that, I've now seen the car probably 10 or 12 times, and I hate to flip flop because as a car designer, it's like I value my when I open my mouth, it's just my opinion, but it's a very considered opinion, whether it's right or wrong. These things are subjective first. We should start by saying that, right? There aren't any wrong answers, but I hate when I change my opinion, but I'm not too big to admit that it's grown on me. Having said that, unlike the F80, which people may have had mixed feelings about in the beginning, you look at an F80 now, especially if it's lowered down on like a nice set of BBS wheels, and it's freaking beautiful. It's badass, and it's beautiful. This car, I think, when people start modifying it, will look bold, it will look imposing, it will look purposeful, it will also look badass, but I don't think it's ever going to be called beautiful. And that kind of bumps me out. It's a little busy. To me, it's a little overwrought, a little overworked. There are elements like the indentations on the hood, which make no freaking sense because it's just, to me, it's lazy design. If it needed heat extracting vents there and they were functional, I'm all about it. But they're not.
Like on the CS or the GTS.
Yeah, it's designed for design's sake, and I have a problem with that. They remind me of the indentations on a Dodge Charger, which is like the last thing on the planet anybody should consider when they look at an M4 is, oh, that looks like, or think when they see an M4 is, oh, that looks like a Dodge Charger. Surprisingly enough, the tall, the vertical kidney grills, I don't mind so much anymore. What I don't like the intakes on either side at the bottom and that angled sort of predator looking surfacing there where it's just trying to look angry just because, I guess. And I also don't like, and part of in defense or fairness to BMW, part of this is because of pedestrian crash standards. I don't like how tall the hood is. because it has to have clearance now before any hard points underneath it, as you know. The hood, you can't see it from this view, but from a side view, the hood looks very, very tall. And I don't love
trying
that.
to see if I have a side view of the car here. Wait.
You have some great photos of this thing, by the way. All the photos that you've taken have been really good. And I as you know, I had sent some to Ed at VinWki, and he put some in that story.
I did. I was going to tease you about that. I was like, I'm VinWki famous almost.
Yeah. I should have told him to give you a photo credit on there, but I'd forgotten. I sent him a bunch of stuff. I didn't know what he was going to use. You can't really see it from there because you can't see much. But anyhow, and then like the flare at the rear fender is really abrupt.
Yeah, I got one of that.
And not super well resolved. One of the reasons I like the F80 better than the F82 was that flare has to happen really quickly. So people that don't realize it, that the M version of the G80 has to keep the rear doors. They can't spend the money to stamp a new door. And so that's the door that it shares with a common 3 Series. But of course, the fender after that door flares. And so on the F80, the flare happens really, really quickly.
It's dramatic.
But really nicely. And it looks more butch than it looks on the M4, on the F82. On this car, it's so close to the door that it just doesn't really work. And I can imagine that the studio struggled with the clay model trying to figure out what to do there, but that solution isn't great, in my opinion.
Let me call up an M4 here.
Yeah, having said that, I've seen the car enough now, I would absolutely, positively, without a doubt, buy one. Where I first saw it, I was like, oh, I guess I'm skipping that generation M3. I would definitely buy one. And the other thing too that bothers me is that the colors, these launch colors, that Sao Paulo yellow and Isle of Man.
Isle of Man, yeah.
The Isle of Man actually isn't bad, but with the combo of the orange interior, it's terrible in my opinion. Sao Paulo yellow, you're going to see that in South Florida, and that's about it, I think.
It's reminds me of what Lamborghini a Lamborghini color.
It's just
too much, essentially.
man. It's too much. I think once we start seeing these cars in Alpine white and in whatever gray color they've got now, Donington gray, whatever they use, it's going to be way more acceptable.
Yeah.
So anyway,
so
dynamically,
awesome.
They will be absolute beasts. So I've got an F97, the X3M competition.
Yes.
That I flashed, so it's rear drive capable and now has 640 horsepower. It's a rocket ship. That drivetrain is going to be in these cars, exactly the same drivetrain, but hauling another 700 or 800 fewer pounds. It's going to be a 10-second car out of the box. It's going to be an absolute animal. So that will go a long way to having people, or allowing people to forgive its looks if they're not happy with them.
All right, and then the quick thing with the M440i. So I think this one's mineral white with the Shadowline package. So I don't think the grille works really well with the standard chrome. I think it just looks out of place. I think this is a little bit better. And there is obviously some curvature to the grille, so it's not like a pig nose and flat.
Yeah.
What about this design? It's less aggressive than the M3, M4.
I'll tell you, and I know I'm in the minority here, I prefer this, and I'll tell you why. If you look at them side by side, this grille has a finish to it. Like the surround is a finish, right? And so you have bodywork, you have the grille surround, and then the graphic of the actual opening, and it looks finished. When I first saw the M3, it looked like, and this is a bad slide. I don't mean this to be as negative as it sounds, but it looked like a mid-'80s, early '90s Pontiac. In that, the plastic of the front bumper went right into the grille without a surround, without a finish, and it looked cheap. It looked inexpensive, and I preferred it on the regular 4 Series because of the finishing that the surround gives. It gives it this finished look. Having said that, the material inside the grille, the mesh, I know that these are active shutters and all that. That looks big as hell, and I'm not a fan of that. That would look way better with just some simple slats. But the grille opening itself, I prefer on the regular 4 than I do on the M cars.
Okay, so we're down to about 10 minutes. So I guess what we can do is basically try and open up to some questions. So if anyone out there has any questions, you can type them in.
The two people that are in
the chat. And then, let's see. I did have one from a friend of mine.
There's a real person.
Hey there.
Hey, how's it going?
Go ahead and ask your question.
It's going well. What was that in the background? Was that a Jacques Villeneuve? What was that?
That's Nick Heidfeld, and behind him is, I'm trying to move my head.
Nice.
There you go.
Oh, you're hardcore BMW. The
Yeah, actually,
BMWs, I love it.
I actually met you at the M Track Day 2 years ago, I think.
You
And
look familiar. I think we've seen each other for sure.
yeah, I was. We had a good discussion about being too big and too old to do this professionally. Oh, I mean, I had a ton of design questions. I actually had a racing question for you.
Shoot, whichever one you want.
Do you have a sim and do you use one to practice or?
I don't. If I did, if I had a sim, I'd probably have no relationship with anybody on the planet because all I would do is sit at home and race. I would be divorced. I would be broke because I wouldn't want to leave the house. I'm a super competitive person and I'm not very good at those sims, in all honesty. And so I would be determined to get good at it.
Oh, fair enough.
But having said that, I think they're absolutely useful for learning tracks and for developing some racecraft and stuff. I don't think they're quite the end all like a lot of people think, but they're definitely useful. They're just expensive and time consuming. And I'd rather have a life.
Oh yeah, and I know other people ask questions, but thanks so much. This has been brilliant. I've
Absolutely
really enjoyed this.
Absolutely.
It's all due to Emile, it's not me. It's all Emile.
I was going to say, you can get my info from Mike or on Instagram, find me, and I try to answer every single question I ever get on Instagram. I get a lot of design questions or a lot of how do I get to do what you do for a living? And I try, especially when I'm on a flight, to answer all those questions.
No, I really like the feedback. And the grill, oh my God. It looks like the basket weave at the back of a chair to me. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's sort of like that.
I wish there were a more eloquent solution to it. So.
And it seems like they're sticking to their guns. They're not backing off of it. So we'll all get used to it little by little.
Yep, you're gonna have to.
But yeah, great observations. Thanks so much.
You got it. Thanks for the question.
All right, anyone else? Feel free to unmute or you can type a question in for Emile. Oh, I think friend wrote in, he wanted to know, Emile. Obviously, the M3, M4 has gained weight, even the M5 has with the X-Drive system. How do you feel about the extra gain in weight and how it's going to affect the handling of the car? No, well, I don't think that the M5 is freaking amazing.
I think it's fair to say we've all gained weight as we get older. Yeah, obviously it's not a plus, right? Nobody, everybody that knows anything, anybody that knows anything about vehicle dynamics knows that weight is the enemy. Having said that, crash standards become more stringent. Safety advents like airbags and all kinds of things add weight to the vehicles. Nobody wants to give up the, I don't know, automated rear screen, which why the heck you have to have that on a car. The soft closed trunk and doors and all that stuff that in my opinion probably doesn't belong on an M car. I guess to compete, if Mercedes is doing it, we have to do it kind of a thing. We have all those things in the car. I mean, think about an M5. And I say this to people after a hot lap where we're sliding the hell out of it. And they're like, wow, I can't believe this car can do that. I always point out, and by the way, massaging and air conditioned seats while we're doing all that stuff, right? Yes. So it's like, does an M car need those things? I mean, to me, the answer is no. But sales would prove that, hey, apparently they do need those things. And so as you continue to put everything into these cars, they're going to continue to gain weight, right? I don't like it. Somehow they continue to defy physics because the cars keep getting faster and better. XM drive obviously is a big part of that. Yeah, at some point there's going to have to be a change and things are going to have to start getting lighter, but I just don't know when that's going to happen. But especially as long as they continue to make the cars do what they do and be so great dynamically.
Who cares, right?
Man.
All right, so I got another question. Sitting behind you on the top shelf there is a model of the F-117 Nighthawk.
Yes.
So he's asking, what's different about it to you since you're a car guy? Well, I know the story, but go ahead.
Okay, so you know this, I think, about me. My favorite man-made object in the world is the SR-71. I'll show you. My office isn't set up, but you see it right by the doorway. You see what's on the wall there, an SR-71. So I'm a huge fan of Kelly Johnson and his aircraft. Some of my favorite, and this is before I realized they were all Kelly Johnson airplanes. The F-104 Starfighter, one of my favorite aircraft, was an early Kelly Johnson aircraft. I'm a huge World War II aviation buff, and my favorite fighter from World War II is a P-38 Lightning, another Kelly Johnson airplane. So I read the book Skunk Works by Ben Rich, who was a successor to Kelly Johnson at Lockheed. And it's a great read. I can't recommend that book highly enough to anybody. Skunk Works by Ben Rich. And when I read about the story about the F-117, not a pretty airplane. It's funny. So if I can bring the story back towards BMW, comparing it to the G80 M3 and the, what is it G82, the M4 now?
Yes.
Comparing it to those cars, they're very purposeful, maybe less so beautiful. Anyway, the story of the development of F-117 in particular was amazing to me. And I happen to find this die-cast model that's behind me. It's in the paint scheme of Have Blue, the very early airplanes.
Oh yeah.
It's not the black jet. And I just bought it because I think it's such a cool. It's kind of anti-design, which I'm not a fan of. And it's so funny going back to talking about Franz, this Tesla Cybertruck. When that launched, I remember thinking, what the hell is he thinking? Because it's sort of anti-design as well. But the story of the development of the F-117 was amazing, and anybody that reads the book will know it. And that's how I picked up that model. And I'm a huge, again, to reiterate, huge Kelly Johnson fan. Everything that he's done has been pretty incredible, including my favorite object ever, the SR-71 Blackbird.
All right, so I think maybe one more question here from the crowd. Favorite cars of the past, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, not just BMWs.
Good question. 1960, I'm going to go with a 64 250 GT Lusso. I think one of the most beautiful cars of all time. 1970 is a tough one for me because there were a lot of great cars there. I'm going to go with my poster car, the Countach, because you see a Countach today and it still stops you dead in your tracks. It still looks like an alien spacecraft on the ground. Fast forwarding to the 80s get a little tougher as well. 1980s, probably a Testarossa or a 288 GTO. 90s, McLaren F1. Yeah. And 2000, there it is.
Conveniently drawn, or I guess printed up for Blip Shift by Emile. So look for this coming up again on Blip Shift probably sometime soon.
Yeah,
every shirt you buy gets Emile $1 for his Nurburgring return trip.
That's right. That's right. I went to the Nurburgring the first trip. About half of my trip to the Nurburgring was Blip Shift t-shirt sales. So yeah, McLaren F1, and then newer cars. The LaFerrari to me is just drop dead gorgeous. I love that car. Every now and then a car will launch that makes me wish I was back in the car design world and designing cars, and that I had designed it. And that was one of them. I saw LaFerrari and I was like, oh, weak at the knees. I wish I designed that car. Good question.
All right, so I think we'll probably end it there. Our time is up. I know you got a place to be shortly, Emile, but thanks again for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've always been so generous with your time. So if you want to find Emile on social media, Instagram's the best place. So it's his first initial E, then his last name Bouret on Instagram. You can find him also on
EBOURET. Yeah.
You can also find him on Facebook.
Although he doesn't, on Facebook,
he's not actively, but it's posting it from Insta to them.
Copies my Instagram, but I don't check it enough to respond to people there.
And do you want to give out your email too? People want to ask you a few more questions. So that's
It's my first initial. Yep.
At me.com.
Correct. At me.com.
And he's also an artist, which we didn't really touch on a lot here.
Right.
But if you're, I don't know, you're still doing like basically ordered type things.
I've been trying to finish a commission of a yellow LaFerrari with the doors up for a couple in Florida. And I'm still working on it. It's actually kicking my ass a little bit, but I'm back home from my last trip in a couple of weeks, and I'm determined to finish that one painting. I have 4 other commissions after that I'm finishing, and they can see them on my website, which is EmileBouret.com, EmileBouret.com. You can see most of my artwork on there.
Yeah, and next time we as a chapter are down at Thermal, we'll show off another piece of Emile's artwork, which is sort of hidden, but not really.
You can have a scavenger hunt, see who finds it first.
Yeah, but it's the M1 Pro car.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess that'll wrap it up. Maybe we can do this again sometime in the future.
Yep, stay in touch, kids. Anybody out there, if you have any questions, fire away. Instagram. I like I said, I respond to all of them. Sometimes it takes me a little while to get to them, but I do.
Yeah. All right. Again, can't thank you enough, Emile.
Mike, thank you for your passion and enthusiasm and just your freaking endless energy, man. Appreciate you.
All right. And we got the Bald Brotherhood going on too.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Thanks very much for tuning in. We'll put this up on YouTube eventually once I get the recordings down.
I'm sure I'll hear from BMW about my opinions on the new car.
We'll blur your face and do something else with it. Right?
There you go.
Change
Thanks,
your
guys.
voice.
Appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.
See you, brother.